Hi everyone. In this presentation we would like to talk about the importance of considering shared use when designing interactions with everyday systems. First, let me introduce ourselves. I'm Karin Niemantsverdriet and I'm presenting together with Thomas van Werff on behalf also of our other co-authors Harm van Essen and Eggen, who are in the audience here if you have any questions. Now, most of our environments that we're in our everydays are shared. We co-inhabit them with other people, right? Whether it's at home or in the office or in virtually any public space. Now, this makes the systems within those environments that we use, like lighting, temperature, music, or any objects, shared as well. Either because multiple people can input to the system and access the controls, or because an interaction by one person affects all the other people in the space. So take this room as an example. There's only one person currently controlling the lighting, for example. But if he decides to, or she decides to switch the lights off, then we will all be sitting in the dark. So this we consider as shared systems, where either multiple people can access the input or where an interaction affects others. Now, looking at most IoT technologies that are being developed and smart home technologies, they seem to be developed much more for environments like this, bachelor apartments, where there's only one person deciding everything. And the interactions seem to be often designed accordingly, looking at their use of personal presets, personalized data, and personal devices like smartphones. Now we are wondering if this is the best fit, and most of all we're wondering what impact it has on actual use of these everyday systems to have such personal interactions. From CCW, or research on collaborative systems, like we've also seen in the first presentation, we know that the design of the interface has a big impact on how people can coordinate use amongst each other and how they talk about use. And there is a whole research field looking at how to design interfaces more appropriately for this coordination. So for example, your Google Docs or whatever other collaboration system you use is very carefully designed to have all these information cues embedded through which you can coordinate behavior. Communication systems is another example where a lot of research has been done in this. And we wonder whether this should also translate to more everyday interactions with IoT-like interactive technologies. So to conclude, our aim, or to summarize our aim of the study that we will present, we want to investigate what the effect of the chosen interaction style is on how people coordinate shared use. And we want to detail these two aspects. So what are differences in coordination in shared use and what interface aspects can impact it?
So to do so, we did a comparative of longitudinal use of 3 interfaces for a lighting system in an open plan office. So I will explain these 3 interfaces one by one, but first I want to give you an impression of our study setup. We have equipped an open plan office at the university with an internet-connected lighting system. And this workspace is occupied daily by both students and staff of the university, and it's used for individual and teamwork. And the lighting system that we installed there comprises 22 luminaires. And these luminaires were grouped in 4 areas. These corresponded with the table areas that were in the room themselves. And these areas could be changed in luminous intensity as well as in color temperature. So this is an impression of the 3 interfaces that we introduced in our study. These designs are based on 3 common interaction styles that you often see. So first we have the floor plan, which is an application for your personal devices. So it could be used on your phone, on your tablet, or on your computer. Next we have the pointer interface. This is a set of remote controls, so you could actually point to the lighting and change that. And the third interface is the canvas interface. This is a tangible interface, pretty big, and installed centrally in the room. So I have to make clear that these interfaces, although they differ in interaction style, they have exactly the same control over the lighting. And now I will show a video for all 3 separately, and I will talk over them to explain it a bit. So this is the floor plan. And the floor plan, as I said, is an application on your phone or laptop. And to change the light, the user can see on the map and choose a location where he wants to change, select that, use the sliders to make a setting, and press the apply button to actually apply the light in that space. Next to that, you could also add an activity icon to show an intention that you had with the light setting. So next to the personal devices that everybody had, and you can use the app, we also had a central tablet in the space so that it's accessible to everybody that's in the room. So secondly, we have the pointer interface. As I said, this is a set of 4 interfaces, which all are different colors. These were positioned on the table groups, and one can use the sliders again to make a light setting. And the different thing here is that you actually had to press and point towards the location where you wanted to change the light. On the ceiling there were indicator lights, and these took on the color of the remote control that was used to make the light setting. So in this way, the last setting was always showed, the last author of the settings. So in this case, for example, the blue controller changed all the lighting in the space. And the third interface is the canvas interface. As said, a big tangible interface displayed centrally in the room. And it contained 4 tokens, and these tokens represented, again, the table areas where the lighting could be changed. So by moving the tokens up or down or horizontally, you could change the intensity of the lighting and the color temperature. Moreover, you could add an extra boundary. So you could use the boundary pen to draw a circle around 1 or more tokens to indicate your preference for the light setting. And this way you can communicate whether a change is allowed, or maybe you wanted to have it at exact that same spot and nobody should touch it. So in this case, the blue boundary clearly communicates, please leave it this way. So these 3 interfaces, we have introduced them one by one in our study. And in our setup, we did that for 5 weeks for each interface, so it's a total of about 15 weeks. And after each use period, we interviewed 17 participants that participated in this one. And this resulted in a total of more than 1,000 interactions. From the interviews, we got the quotes and, sorry, one moment. So we did the study, but this order of the interfaces, we expected that there would be an order effect, so this really would influence how people experience the interfaces. So that's why we did the study again with a new set of participants. So we had 14 new participants and introduced the interfaces the other way around. So first the canvas, followed by the pointer, and then the floor plan. And because this was a shorter study, we also decided to do only 1 interview, not between each interface, but only at the end. And as you can see, there are a little less interactions with the system that way, and also a little less quotes that we extracted from the interviews. So we analyzed the quote using thematic analysis, and we were especially looking for differences between these interfaces and the effect that it had on the coordination. And there we found 3 different aspects of coordinations that were influenced, and Karin will tell you more about them.
Okay, so we found 3 aspects on which the interface seemed to have an effect on how people coordinated shared use amongst each other. The amount of verbal communication that people had while interacting, the level of consideration they placed with other people, and the level of perceived accountability, so the responsibility they felt after a lighting change. I will give examples for each one of them. First of all, verbal communication. In general, it was seen as good practice to ask for consent before changing the light. However, it was sometimes rather difficult to start this conversation, and it could feel like a threshold to interrupt others' workflows, for example, to ask, hey, do you mind if I change the lighting? There were differences between the interfaces in how high this threshold was perceived. So for a big difference between the three interfaces is how visible the person that is interacting is. With the floor plan interface, a smartphone application, it is much less visible that someone is going to change the light than with the tangible remote control, which was a very expressive movement. And this could, being invisible made it more difficult to start verbal communication. Logically for the people that were affected by the change, because they didn't know who to address and say, hey, please don't do that. But interestingly, also for the person that was interacting, because just making it visible that the intention for interaction was there made it easier to ask others for consent, as this quote shows. If people don't know that you want to interact, it becomes a bit awkward to start a conversation. Now, once the communication started, the interfaces could also play a role. Especially with the canvas interface, so the tangible interface, it was more of a mediator for conversation. Since the physical tokens express so clearly what the current setting is, it became easy to talk about, hey, should we put it a little bit more bright or a little bit darker? And as this quote shows, without such an interface, it is much more difficult to have that conversation. Okay. Considering others, in general, people took other people into account in the interactions that they made. But with the interfaces that were personally owned, like the floor plan interface, it felt more like a personal decision. It's my interface, I change the light. Whereas in the more communal interfaces, like the pointer, which was shared per table group, people also felt like it was a shared decision and that they had to include others in that interaction. As this quote shows, with the pointer, you don't just go with your own vote, but if it would be yours, you would want your preferred lighting. So regardless of whether the change would affect others and whether the lighting is shared, a shared interface makes people makes decisions also more shared. Now, lastly, looking at perceived accountability, here again the visibility of the interactor played a big role. So with the canvas interface, this one was placed centrally in the room. So to change the light, people had to walk up to the interface, which was of course very visible. And this participant expresses how changing the lighting there could kind of feel like being on stage. And as it nicely illustrates, says it's almost like a walk of shame when you walk back to your place and you know other people will not like the adjustment you make. And because of this, with the canvas interface, we saw that people probed more for reactions. So they changed the light and then looked around, is this okay? Does everyone agree? Now, interestingly, for the people in the room, this increased the level of vigilance. So they felt, since I can see that other people are going to make an adjustment, I also kind of have to watch it, because it is our communal interface. And this could feel like a bit of a burden, as this quote illustrates. With the canvas, I was constantly thinking, oh no, there's someone there again, sigh. Now, the pointer interface, interestingly, relieved this burden of vigilance a little bit by making it easy to restore the previous setting. Since people had the interface close by, they didn't mind so much about other people were doing because they could just restore it in case they did not agree. Now, these are just a few examples that we illustrated. There are definitely more in the paper, and there's also more in the paper about the explicit communication in each of the interface, so the boundaries, the indicator lights, and the icons you might remember from the videos. So to conclude, what this shows is that the interaction style has a big effect on how people coordinate shared use and how people share the lighting system amongst each other. Now, it is very difficult to say in general whether more or less verbal communication, more or less consideration, or more or less accountability is better. This is really context dependent. But I think as designers, when we design systems, we have a vision of appropriate use, and we can definitely play with these three factors. So to come back to the original goal that we had, we wanted to see what the influence was of the interaction style on coordination of shared use. Now, coordination of shared use, we found three different aspects that were influenced: verbal communication, considering others, and perceived accountability. And when we generalize our three interfaces into the different characteristics that they had, we can also detail those further. So we saw differences in the expressiveness, in the ownership of the interface, in whether people could verify an interaction before applying it, the attention that was placed to the context while interacting, the visibility of the person interacting, and the retrievability of previous settings. And these are aspects that designers can play with in order to influence coordination of shared use. So to detail that further, if you want to make verbal communication easier in the interfaces that you design, it is important to consider the expressiveness and the visibility of the person interacting. If you want decision making to be more communal or to be more individual, you can play with the ownership of the interface, the verification of a setting, and attention to context. And if you want to mediate in the perceived accountability, you can play with the visibility of the interaction and the retrievability of previous settings. This is not meant to be a comprehensive list, but these are definitely aspects that we can consider in the design process and work with for the specific context that we are designing for. Thank you for your attention.
Hi, Catherine Isbister from UC Santa Cruz. There's no mic, but who cares? Oh, I have to hover. Catherine Isbister, UC Santa Cruz. So I just had a question about how your work relates to proxemics, to the notion of use of space. Did you give any thought to those theories and how they might inform how you were thinking about what was happening among people?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We kind of constrained the areas of influence in the study because we wanted to keep control exactly the same between the three interfaces. But what we saw was that people were more willing to, or that it was easier to coordinate shared use in a close group of people, especially if they were working together, but also if they were sitting on the same table, for example, and in the whole space. But there are differences there in the interfaces. So the floor plan was individually owned, which made decision-making more here. The pointer was shared per table group, which makes the decision of the table. And also there we saw more interactions that only affected one table. There was less impact on the whole room. Whereas the canvas interface, since it was one central interface, the lighting decision became also more of a shared decision between everyone in the room.
Right, interesting, thank you.
Hi, I'm Andres Lucero, Aalto University. Thank you, very interesting work. I have a question. You correctly separate aspects of interaction and aspects of controlling the actual lighting in social ways. I was wondering, why did you decide to pick 3 interactions that involve touch when some of these social issues, especially if you, in the real world, if you want to change light settings, you might, in a shared space, you might ask, is it okay if I switch off this light or if I dim it a bit? So can you elaborate, say a little bit more why you chose 3 touch interactions and not choose things like speech, for example?
That's a good question, actually. Well, one of the major things was, of course, that we wanted to facilitate this conversation between people. Although I have to say that we not deliberately did not choose for example, speech interaction, it is an interesting direction. So, but the thing is, I think it's good to see the differences between the coordination amongst people themselves and the interaction with the system, indeed. Yeah, thank you.